We're looking at the 500 year periods after the Buddha's death. I won't go back and repeat everything that I covered a couple of weeks ago. I'm just going to kind of expect that people will kind of review that and come up to speed, so to speak. But where we are is the we're talking about the 500 year periods after the Buddha's death. He said that uh, this fifth 500-year period has been called Mappo, the age of, for lack of a better word, perhaps, of the way it's currently translated, is the age of degeneration. I'm not completely comfortable with that common term. I think it's more appropriate that this would be the age of confusion or the age of far removed from the Buddha's original teaching. As frequently happens, the further away we are from the original teacher's teachings, the more difficult it becomes to understand, and also the it's difficult to grasp, true intent or heart. Here we are. We're only 200. This country's only 200 years old, and already we can't figure out what the founders meant by when they wrote the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. That's why we have one of the functions of the Supreme Court supposedly is to try and figure it all out. So we're not that far removed, much less 2,000 years. I remember there's a Star Trek episode where the people had created a religion out of the Constitution, and they worshipped this document. And when the Star Trek folks arrived at this planet or universe, the people there they weren't pronouncing the words the same way we pronounce them. They had broken them up in different accents and different syllables and combined words in weird kinds of ways. And the Star Trek people couldn't figure out what was going on and what these people were all about, and so on and so forth. I don't remember all the details, but I was kind of fascinated that when it finally dawned on them what this religion was all about, they realized they had converted the Constitution into a religious document, and were praying and creating ceremonies based on the Constitution. It's kind of far fetched, but it's a good illustration of how things can change over time, and
Mm.
that was one of the things that the Buddha is trying to establish here. So, and people in the past have mistakenly said that all this occurs in the Lotus Sutra, and yet it does not. In fact, come from the Lotus Sutra. The uh, the division of the division of the 500-year periods actually is. This is how it's broken down, and it occurs. We find this in actually the Sutra of the Great Assembly, not the Lotus Sutra. And Nichiren actually points this out. He doesn't claim otherwise. It's just that um, maybe perhaps as things gotten translated into English, or maybe because people tend to sometimes take shortcuts and oversimplify things when they are explaining them, it sort of got kind of misconstrued by many people that this is somewhere in the Lotus Sutra, and it in fact is not. But the Buddha does say that in this age of degeneration, this Mappo era, this period 2,000 some odd years after his death, he asks who will teach the Dharma of the Lotus Sutra in the Saha world. And so, understanding the breakdown that's presented in the Sutra of the Great Assembly is so the 1 through 500 years after the Buddha's teachings, many will attain Buddhahood. And we can kind of look at this as, with it, 500 years, of course, is still several generations out, but it is, the influence of the Buddha's teachings would be so powerful and profound that virtually any of his teachings would provide a path or give people a framework for attaining enlightenment. And I kind of look at that this is within a few generations of the Buddha's lifetime. After this first 500-year period, we get 500 to 1,000 years. that the path to enlightenment will be study and meditation. So deep study into the sutras, and this is a period where meditation is quite effective, just silent sitting and contemplation. Another way of looking at this, I think, is, and this is part of this is my conjecture, if you will, that you know, the Buddha is still fresh in people's minds in the first 500 years. In the second 500 years, not so much, decreasing influence of the direct Buddhist teachings. And so people will need to really exert themselves in study and contemplation on what the Buddha, was trying to teach. And then after this, in the third 500-year period, it starts to become more ritualistic. There's it's a ceremonial, and so the second 500 years, the emphasis is on reading the sutras and deeper understanding and knowledge. And this is actually the period kind of we're transitioning in Chihi or Tentai in this time period where, and if you look at Chihi or Tentai's teachings, they're very, very profound and very difficult to understand for most people. And shortly after Chihi, expounded the Makashikan and his interpretation of the Lotus Sutra and his, bringing, in a sense, updating, for lack of a better word, updating the Lotus Sutra to his time, this third and fourth 500-year period. Shortly after Tentai's death or Chihi's death, his practice of Buddhism became just vanished practically. No one followed it. No one. There very few kept it going because it was just so difficult and so profound, so intellectual in a way. It was, kind of like the ivory tower version of the Lotus Sutra, as if the Lotus Sutra wasn't complex enough. And then in the fourth 500-year period, we have, or what's it, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, fourth 500-year period. It's mainly just building temples and towers and structures to honor and revere the Buddhist teachings, in particular, and the Lotus Sutra. Buddhist teachings in general, and the Lotus Sutra in particular. So as time goes on, it becomes more formalistic, more ritualistic, and less of an embracing. I guess you could say an embracing with one's life. It begins to be strictly an intellectual activity or a ritualistic activity. And then the Buddha said that in the 2,000-year period, beginning after his death, that the ability the capacity to understand the Lotus Sutra and the Buddhist teachings would become so limited. And it's not that the people's capacity necessarily is limited. It's just that their ability to relate directly to the teachings themselves becomes clouded or confused because so many things are happening, so many different. The world is a different place 2,000 years after the Buddha's lifetime. In the Buddha's lifetime, things were pretty primitive. Communication was very limited. The understanding of the world was limited as well. Also, the influence of other religions is limited as well. There's probably some exchange and contact between the Greeks through Alexander and those in the Buddha, in India at Buddha's time, or at least some residual influence from Alexander's invasion and conquering of India. And it's really interesting studying Alexander's lifetime or activities in India. It's really interesting that he didn't come into India like many conquerors. When they invaded or conquered a country, they just came in and imposed, in a sense, their own cultural beliefs, their own cultural practices, and imposed them directly on to the population that they conquered. But Alexander's approach in India and much of the place that he conquered was to allow the culture of the people that he conquered to continue, and he supported, embraced it, and used that as a vehicle for his own rule. Now, India was his eventual downfall, but still, it's quite interesting. The kind of the history of Alexander and his invasion and occupation of great portions of India. So we have, increasing outside influence, increasing communication, increasing uh, uh, awareness of different parts of the world, the increasing variety of cultures that are experiencing and looking at Buddhism. We also have the rise of the the merchant class. Prior to the Buddha's lifetime, the merchant class was virtually non-existent, and we can actually see this in the Lotus Sutra. If for people who think that, pardon me, that the Lotus Sutra are the actual words of the Buddha, uh, are really kind of hiding their head in the sand in a way, because they're ignoring the fact that much of the Lotus Sutra demonstrates the emergence and influence of the merchant class, which didn't exist in the Buddha's lifetime. So to say that the Lotus Sutra is the words of the Buddha would really be misleading or downright false, and that's not why we practice or revere the Lotus Sutra. Not for being the direct quotations. It's not a red letter book, to coin a phrase there, but this is the heart of the Buddha. This is there were kernels of it that the Buddha probably taught, and they were expanded upon as time went on. Also, the Lotus Sutra is, a heavily Mahayana influenced text. The Mahayana tradition and Mahayana outlook on life, if you will, really hadn't fully developed in the time of the Buddha, and yet we see a really development of Mahayana thought, Mahayana tradition within the Lotus Sutra teaching. And yet, during the Buddha's lifetime, there was that, I guess you could say, that flavor to his teachings. It's just that immediately after his lifetime, because of what we see here, this study and meditation, that it became more and more monastic and more exclusive of a practice that removed itself from the general population. It became impractical for the general population to practice. And then we have the Mahayana tradition that wants to bring it out of the monastery and back to the people. And so we see an influence of that, and within the Lotus Sutra. So here we are, 2,000 years after the Buddha's lifetime. We have the beginning of worldwide commerce. We have it's now gone through, the Buddhist teachings have gone, the Mahayana tradition has gone through Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, and China was not a unified entity then, much more than it is now, even in spite of the imposition of communism throughout. China is a very diverse country. I'm sure that you know this. So, just going into China, in the time when Buddhism was, especially the Lotus Sutra, was emerging or entering into China, was around the 7th, 8th, between the 5th and 8th century. And we can see evidence of this in the caves of Dunhuang and Kazil that have been uncovered or discovered within the last 100 years or so. These caves were sealed up because Buddhism was being severely oppressed in northern China. And while this, happened gradually, it became more, this oppression moved further and further south. So there was roughly 100 or so years between when this heavy oppression began in northern China to when it finally got down to southern China. And by this time, the Buddhist monks and priests were aware of this happening, and so they hid and buried and sealed up in caves many, many Buddhist treasures that have been unearthed and are still even being cataloged, thousands and thousands of sutras. Who knows? We may even yet find an original copy of the Lotus Sutra, even though it has evaded us for these several thousand years. Another thing that when I studied this era of Chinese Buddhist art, it's just amazing how much the Lotus Sutra was revered in China at this time. There's all kinds of depictions of stories from the Lotus Sutra that we can see on the cave walls of Dunhuang, Kazil, and one other cave structure. And all of this is on the Silk Road, and this is a very dry, uh, uh, steady temperature environment. So of course, it was sealed in caves, which helped it even better. But these are very well preserved paintings and sculptures and texts that are in these caves, and it's quite fascinating. In fact, there is a one image that I keep in my mind. You know, there's a theory, or I don't know, maybe it's just a saying, but that a truth, if it's a universal truth or a fundamental truth, it will arise and it will keep arising because it is so fundamental. And I look at these images from these caves in Dunhuang and Kuzil, that there are actual depictions of the two Buddhas side by side with a stupa in between. And no, it doesn't have our inscription of the Odaimoku on it, but it is clearly a representation of the important chapters of the Lotus Sutra. They were sealed up in caves. There's no way Nichiren had ever seen them or even knew they existed, because we only just found them within the last 7,500 years ago. And yet we have this same image that reoccurs during Nietzsche's lifetime in the 13th century. So from the 7th, 8th century or so, this image, or this truth, if you will, vanished, and then it reemerged, because not even Tendai or Chihi created such an image. And then we have Nichiren um, bringing this image back to the forefront. Again, I don't know if we can accurately say he created it, but he certainly promoted it, and he certainly highlighted, he certainly celebrated this imagery of the two Buddhas side by side. So, that was kind of a chicken skin kind of moment, if you will, when I saw those in my textbooks. It's just a little personal history there. So, 2,000 years after the Buddha's lifetime, we have a lot of disputes. We have, the merchant class is supreme now. The military, especially in Japan with the shogun. China had gotten over their heavy military period, and we're now in the court and imperial kind of environment. And the reference to eunuchs in the Lotus Sutra uh, is a strong reference to the court politics. So the avoidance of eunuchs is, I believe, more of an indication, or more of a warning about playing court politics, getting involved in politics, and catering and kowtowing to political influences, more than it is about associating with people who are traditionally considered homosexual because they've been castrated. I don't know that that was necessarily true, but that was kind of the stereotype that's been handed down over the years. I'm not sure that there's really substantial evidence to indicate that eunuchs are necessarily more homosexual than non-eunuchs. But anyway, so in fact, someone just wrote to me a couple of days ago asking me if I thought that statement in the Lotus Sutra about eunuchs applied to homosexuals, and I said I really don't think so. I said, for one thing, the idea of homosexuality is relatively a modern concept, or the aversion to homosexuality. And virtually every culture prior to Christianity's influence in that particular culture, homosexuality was, considered relatively normal, or at least acceptable. Certainly not outside the range of the norm. And hence we have, our problems today based from strictly a religious perspective about homosexuality. It occurs in nature. Animals, there's evidence of animal homosexuality or same-sex, activity. Anyway, diverging here. So you can see that how people change. I mean, Buddhism is. I'll get back to this point. Buddhism has gone from India to Pakistan to Afghanistan to China and now to Japan. Within China, there's several different cultures that it has gone through. So it has gone through quite a lot of cultures before it arrives in Japan. Japan gets Buddhism from Korea. People, often aren't quite aware of that Korea, the ruler, the king of Korea had a dream. I think it was a dream anyway. But the king of Korea, uh, had this dream or vision that he needed to take Buddhism to Japan. And so he puts together a fleet of people or ships and sends priests to Japan and brings them actually the Lotus Sutra. So and then Japan quickly kind of becomes very prejudiced against Korea over time. I mean, Koreans are hated more than any other group of people by the Japanese, and yet genetically speaking, the Koreans and the Japanese are identical because thousands of years ago, uh, people from Korea came to Japan and wiped out all the indigenous Japanese people. And so everybody who populates Japan now actually came from Korea. It's genetic stock. So it's kind of interesting how we manage to persecute and become prejudiced to people who are actually us. I mean, how many, they said, there's very few white people in America who don't have some African American blood in themselves. So it's just kind of interesting how hate kind of self promulgates or promulgates itself. Anyway, that's just an overview of the 500-year period and how we, can lose sight of or lose the ability to connect with the Lotus Sutra. All right, so we have the spread of Buddhism in the fifth 500-year period. Nichiren says that the gist of the Lotus Sutra, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, should be spread widely, and that we must make this decree by the Buddha a reality. The Buddha, he didn't say Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, but he did say who's going to spread or teach this sutra, the Lotus Sutra, in the period of degeneration after his lifetime in the Saha world. And um, in we have the contemporary disciples of the Buddha. Many of them would say that, well, they would, but not in this world that we live in, because it's going to be too hard. People will be very against it. They will persecute. So it's just going to be too hard. They'd rather spread the Lotus Sutra someplace else. And then there was a group of people that came from someplace else in the universe and said, we'll sign up. We'll volunteer to teach the Lotus Sutra in the Saha world. And the Buddha said no thanks to that as well. Part of it is that he first off, he's looking for somebody to teach it in this Saha world. And if you're going to volunteer, if somebody asks you to do something, you can't say, well, I volunteer, but I won't do that. I'll do something else. That's really, doesn't make logical sense. And for the people who come from outside this world to spread the teaching, the Lotus Sutra, in a way, kind of think of that movie E.T. and or Stranger in a Strange Land by Heinlein. We don't treat people who are different from us very, very well. Humans have a long history of not treating strangers very nicely. E.T. wasn't welcomed with open arms, and neither was the guy from Mars. I forget if he had a name now. It's been a long time, but in Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. So the Buddha says, no, no thanks. And he's got these bodhisattvas who rise up underground. Anyway, the Nichiren takes it upon, not takes it upon, but his reading of the Lotus Sutra, he finds in chapter 23 that, quoting, "It will spread throughout the world in the fifth 500-year period after the death of the Buddha, lest it should be lost." So he reads that, and he said that this must be done. This is the Buddha's decree. This is the Buddha's wish. Chapter 17 says that at the time when the Dharma is about to disappear in the future age, and certainly by the time Nichiren came around, there was a lot of disagreement about what the Dharma should be. Buddhism had split into various schools and divisions, and people were even misrepresenting the Lotus Sutra. So people would borrow quotations from the Lotus Sutra and insert them into other sutras, saying that the new sutra that they had created, this hybrid sutra, if you will, was superior to the Lotus Sutra because it contained some of what the Lotus Sutra had taught, and some other sutra. So there's great confusion. There's great misrepresentation of the Lotus Sutra by Buddhist teachers, and the people lacking the capacity to study, or lacking the ability to study, or the availability of the text, didn't know any different. So chapter 14 says, even during the time of the Buddha, much hatred and jealousy is raised against this sutra. How much more after his death? And again, this is kind of a retrospective statement. So it's kind of hard to say that the Lotus Sutra is the words of the Buddha, because the Buddha wouldn't speak of his own life retrospectively. I mean, we generally don't speak of ourselves that way. So this is kind of a linguistic giveaway that the Lotus Sutra isn't really the words. It's not a red letter book. So even during the lifetime of the Buddha, much hatred and jealousy is raised against this sutra. How much more after his death? Chapter 10 is, much hatred exists towards this sutra in the world, making it difficult to uphold it. And finally in chapter 21, homage to Shakyamuni Buddha, homage to Shakyamuni Buddha, homage to the Lotus Sutra, homage to the Lotus Sutra. And we look at all of this, so the first few quotations are about how it is supposed to be taught in this world. And as I pointed out in the first part of this lecture a couple of weeks ago, that many contemporaries of Nichiren, many other priests, said that no, the Lotus Sutra should not be taught now because it's just too difficult to understand. And Nichiren says, yes, it's difficult to understand. That's what the Buddha said. The Buddha said it's going to be hard as heck to understand the Lotus Sutra. And all the more so, it should be taught. That in spite of the difficulty of understanding it, it should be taught. Whereas before the Buddha's lifetime, before this 500-year period, it wasn't appropriate for a variety of reasons. And I encourage you, if you haven't listened to the first part of the lecture, to go back and review that. So yes, it's going to be difficult. Yes, there's going to be persecution. And what should we do? And homage to Shakyamuni Buddha. So homage, namaste, namu to Shakyamuni Buddha, namu to the Lotus Sutra, Myoho Renge Kyo. So we get namu Myoho Renge Kyo. This is how we show respect. This is how we venerate the Lotus Sutra. I have written before and also spoken that, to me, I think, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo is, it's a formula. And in a way, understanding the relationship between subject and object, that Namu is ourself. Namu represents how we do Myoho Renge Kyo, if you will. Namu is to revere, respect, venerate, honor, all of these kinds of things, the Myoho Renge Kyo. So if our life isn't a manifestation of devotion, respect, revering, behavior of Myoho Renge Kyo, if our life does not manifest Myoho Renge Kyo, then we're not really having unity of subject and object. So there's a disconnect between our Namu and our Myoho Renge Kyo. I guess from a another religion's perspective, I know in the Catholic religion, there's great veneration of Mary. There's also a big devotion to Stations of the Cross, and carrying out these venerable or venerating activities, these honoring, these revering activities. And yet, if people do that, if they venerate Mary in the church, and then go outside the church and do some horrific crime, or even are just mildly annoying to people or somewhat disrespectful to people, well, there's a disconnect between what Mary represents and what they say they venerate and the activities of their life. And so there's no unification between subject and object. And Buddhism teaches the oneness of subject and object. And how do we achieve this? Well, we achieve it by unifying ourselves, by having our actions express devotion, express veneration, express an absorption of this Myoho Renge Kyo. And what is Myoho Renge Kyo? Well, Myoho Renge Kyo is not just the teachings of this particular sutra, but it is the recognition of the equality of Buddhahood, that we all possess this potential. We talk about chapter, the Bodhisattva Never Despise chapter, and people always say, I want to be like Bodhisattva Fukyo, or I'm just practicing as Bodhisattva Fukyo does. And, if you say, let's see, all of a sudden I'm blank on the word, but maybe you can help me out after I try and explain it to you. But if you say, I forgive you, but you really are kind of like angry about it, and you're just kind of not really sincere, but you're just saying the words, even though it's sort of a passive aggressive kind of statement that I forgive you, you should be happy and thankful that I'm saying this kind of thing. What's the word I'm missing here? It's escaping me for a moment here. You getting an idea of what I'm kind of talking about here?
Maybe begrudging,
Yes,
or
yes. That's the word. That's the word. Thank you very much. I mean, you can offer other words, but that was that. Yeah, begrudging. So if we do it begrudgingly, then there's a disconnect. And many people I've experienced or witnessed, many people say, I respect you, I revere you, as if they do that in spite of what they're feeling or in spite of the other person. And to practice the namu of Myoho Renge Kyo, or namu in our life, or as the mudra for namu is gasho, so our hands together and bowing to someone. To practice that is extremely difficult. We're in a way, as humans, we're really not well programmed to have that kind of reverence and respect for all life,
mm,
even if we disagree with it,
mm,
even if we don't support it, to still respect the human, the Buddha that resides in that person. That doesn't mean that we have to like, just Timothy McVeigh comes to mind just because we commemorated the 20th. Can you believe that 20th year anniversary of the uh, Oklahoma City bombing? I can't. It's hard to imagine that it's been 20 years. But I guess as the longer you live, the more things you experience. And but so we don't have to like Timothy McVeigh. We don't have to approve of his behaviors or anybody else, but we have to respect the life, the potential of his Buddhahood. And that's why I'm really against capital punishment. Is that capital punishment is a little more than revenge.
mhm,
And revenge doesn't really respect the fact that you or I are just as capable of being assholes as anybody else, although we try not to be. And when we are, we generally hope that people will either forgive us or ignore us and allow us to continue being assholes. Uh, but it doesn't work that way. So it's really, really hard. Again, I'm not saying that we have to approve or accept everything that everybody does. However, we have to still honor and revere their potential Buddhahood. And
Mm.
I think that's really important. Okay, I kind of strayed. As I said yesterday, I mean, not yesterday, but a couple weeks ago when I was wrapping this up, that I'm not in any particular hurry to rush through this. So hopefully I'm not just warning. All right, so we have a Buddhism in India in the age of the true Dharma. So at first, only Hinayana was spread and no mention of any Mahayana teachings. Then the Mahayana teachings were mentioned, and Hinayana was refuted. The Mahayana teachings were mentioned, and Hinayana teachings were refuted. But the supremacy of the Lotus Sutra had not been clarified. So the profound teachings in the Lotus Sutra. So why do we claim, or why is the Lotus Sutra considered so profound? First off, we have the obtaining Buddhahood by the two vehicles. So the two vehicles, or sometimes it's called three vehicles, into the single Buddha vehicle. In chapter 2, we have Bodhisattva. We have the Shravakas, the learners, the Pratyeka Buddhas, the self-enlightened. Generally, this is considered those the contemplatives, if you will. So we've got the learners and the contemplatives, and we've got the Bodhisattvas. The Bodhisattvas are the good works people, kind of like Mother Teresa and others that we may think of who have engaged in just good works, not necessarily religiously associated. Gandhi wasn't a particularly religious person.
Mm.
Strong Hindu influence more than Buddhism, but uh, still a noble spirit, a noble character. Martin Luther King, a Christian, but exhibited bodhisattva characteristics. Bodhisattvas aren't always nice people. Um, this is one thing. I was engaged in a conversation with Kanjin Cederman shown in Seattle when I was up there at the beginning of February, and I spent a week up there. That Buddhism kind of has a bad reputation in a way, or we're misunderstood. There's this idea that Buddhism is all about just kind of floating along, and you're not seeing my visuals now as I'm moving your hand, but kind of, just kind of always peaceful and calm, and never gets excited and all this other stuff. And that is so far from the truth. The Buddha was a very emotional person. He even exhibited anger. Why shouldn't he? I mean, he's a human. We all have anger. He was very firm and very strict, especially with Devadatta when Devadatta wanted to split the Sangha. He didn't just take that laying down. He didn't just allow it to happen. He, strongly refuted it. He, brought back those who had split away. He brought them back into the Dharma. Uh, he was skillful and wise at handling his emotions, I guess you could say, but it doesn't
Mm.
mean that they vanished. The Buddha worked very hard, trying to live out his belief system. It wasn't easy. He didn't always sit under a tree. He was out walking around and moving around, and this is one of the arguments that the Mahayana tradition had against the Theravadan or the Hinayana tradition, is that the Buddha didn't sit in a monastery. In fact, the Buddha said that the only time he wanted people in the monastery at Deer Park, the first monastery, was during the rainy season.
Mm.
That was the intent of the monastery practice, was in the rainy season when it's impractical to travel around, especially by foot throughout India, that this is a time to come back together, to learn, to study, to rejuvenate, to recharge, refresh, and to keep this idea of community going. But during the good weather season, get out of the monastery and spread Buddhism and teach and preach and live. Uh, so this was one of the arguments that Mahayanists had, is that Buddhism had just retreated into the monastery and had no relationship to the common people. All right, so in chapter two, the Buddha is saying that it's not any one of the three vehicles of uh, learning, contemplation, or good works. It's in a way, it's all of the three vehicles. It's little bits and pieces of each of the three vehicles. Now,
Mm.
I'm going to say something that is my conjecture. I don't know that any scholar or um, approved scholarly interpretation agrees with this thought or this idea, but something I thought about is that of course, this didn't occur. This teaching really didn't word for word occur during the Buddha's lifetime, and in a way, by the time the Lotus Sutra is actually considered to have been written down in a recorded fashion, that this division between Mahayana and Hinayana at the time, although now we refer to it only as Theravadan, this division had begun to take place. The Mahayanas were establishing their theory, their doctrine, their reason for existence, if we will, and and in a way, this three vehicles into one is kind of like, uh, uh, in a way, bringing all the diverse elements, saying that within this Mahayana teaching of the Lotus Sutra, we can bring in the monastery folks. We can bring in the learners. We can bring in the contemplatives, and bring them under the umbrella of Mahayana tradition. That it's all part of the practice. It's all part of how we become enlightened. That it takes a little bit of everything. So in a way, this is, I think, written partly to this division, this splitting of Buddhism, that the Mahayanas are saying, everybody's under this tent. Uh, then we have the revelation in chapter 16 of the Buddha, attaining enlightenment. How are we doing on time? Okay. Attaining enlightenment in the eternal past or the remote past. We have the superiority of the Lotus Sutra among all the Buddhist scriptures preached, being preached, and will be preached. And the Buddha actually makes this statement that, or in the Lotus Sutra, that this teaching that he's teaching now, this Lotus Sutra, is superior among anything he's previously taught or will teach. And so there's this self-proclamation by the Buddha, even in the Muryogi Kyo, the sutra that appears before the Lotus Sutra. The Buddha says that he's going to be teaching the ultimate teaching, his highest supreme teaching, that all of his 40 years of teaching Buddhism were leading up to this culmination of the revelation of the ultimate purpose, the reason for all Buddhas. And that reason for all Buddhas is to enable all people to become Buddhas. So Buddhas they don't exist, they don't teach just to talk about what they have attained, but they teach in order to make it possible for everyone to attain what they have achieved. We also have the 100 realms and the 1,000 aspects of existence, Ichinen and Sanzen, which we can extract from not just chapter two, but it begins in chapter two, and it's actually found in a way you could say it's found in the chapters of prediction when the Buddha talks about the different disciples. Each of the different disciples represents a different condition of life, and the Buddha is saying that condition of life can attain Buddhahood, and that condition, even Devadatta, who is considered the worst person in all of Buddhism, he would be all of the bad guys throughout history rolled up into one. It was Devadatta. Devadatta was so bad that he didn't even die before he went to hell. Supposedly the earth swallowed him up. Uh, you know, so, and why was Devadatta so bad? Well, because he tried to kill the Buddha, and many times he tried to kill the Buddha, and he also split the Sangha. So these are two terrible, horrible sins in Buddhism. And so, as I say, he got swallowed up. But in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha says that even Devadatta is a Buddha. Even Devadatta attains enlightenment. So we have all the conditions of life, from hell all the way to enlightenment itself, all represented in various places in the Lotus Sutra. So again, this is the Lotus Sutra saying everybody is welcome here. Everybody is part of this story, and the story isn't really complete without everyone. All right. Then we have the beginning and the ending of the Buddha's guidance. Uh, in a way, the Lotus Sutra, uh, the Lotus Sutra does not occur outside of the context of all of the Buddha's teachings. Within the Lotus Sutra, we can find all of the Buddha's primary teachings repeated again. So within the Lotus Sutra, we can find the Four Noble Truths. Within the Lotus Sutra, we can find dependent origination. We can find the Eightfold Path. We can find 12-link chain of causation. All of those teachings are found in the Lotus Sutra, some of them even 2 times within the Lotus Sutra. So for people to say that somehow or another the Lotus Sutra replaces all the Buddhist teachings, ignore the fact that the Lotus Sutra contains all the Buddhist teachings. So Lotus Sutra doesn't replace anything, it adds to. So it says, this is what the Buddha has taught so far, and it's still good, and to that we're going to add this additional stuff. All right, we have the eternal relationship between the Buddha and his disciples. And we have the bodhisattvas that arise from beneath the ground, and I think this is going to be the last slide I'll get through tonight. We have the bodhisattvas that arise from beneath the ground, and they have a relationship with the Buddha that extends into the far distant past. In the Lotus Sutra itself, it indicates that the relationship of the bodhisattvas from beneath the ground have a relationship far deeper, far longer than any of his contemporary disciples. And it's these bodhisattvas that arise from the ground who are the ones who will teach the Lotus Sutra in this age of degeneration after the Buddha's lifetime, the Lotus Sutra in the Saha world. So they arose and went to the Buddha, and I always kind of highlight this, that in contrast, all of the Buddha's contemporary disciples went to the Buddha in the Lotus Sutra and said, what will you do for me? Give me a prediction. I want something. Please assure me. Everybody wanted something from the Buddha. When the bodhisattvas from underground arose, and maybe other people aren't as struck by this, but it's something that I'm interested in. I'm curious in these kinds of things. I look at these little anomalies. When the bodhisattvas from underground arose, the first thing they did, they approached the Buddha and they asked him, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you tired? Has it been difficult to teach the Lotus Sutra? Has it been hard to teach the people of this place, this Saha world, about Buddhism? And so they never asked for anything for themselves. But their concern, first and foremost, was for the Buddha. And nobody else in the Lotus Sutra, and I'm not sure any place else in the sutras, has that much concern for the Buddha over their own personal concerns. Now, a minor point, a petty thing, just an obscure little observation. That's part of who I am. I like to pick out the little details. So it's something to consider. Anyway, these bodhisattvas of underground, people say, well, because I'm practicing the Lotus Sutra in this age, in the Saha world, then I must be a bodhisattva from underground. And yeah, in theory, but that doesn't make you a bodhisattva from under the ground. What makes you a bodhisattva from under the ground is your practice, this connection between Namu and Myoho Renge Kyo. Simply, doing the Lotus Sutra, and simply just by happenstance being in this lifetime doesn't automatically make the connection between you and the Buddha of the Lotus Sutra. It still takes something else. It takes a switch. It's sort of like, just because you go to church doesn't make you a Christian. And I'm not picking on Christians. Just because you go to the temple doesn't make you a Buddhist. What makes you a Buddhist or what makes you a Christian is how you behave. At least this is my belief. And people will sometimes ask me, is Buddhism a religion or a philosophy? In fact, I got a letter from somebody in France tonight. The translation of my Lotus Sutra book is now available in French, and
Oh,
I
nice.
I didn't do that. I had a lot of help put that together. But she'd read it, and oh, now I've lost my train of thought. Anyway,
You were talking about you're a Buddhist if you are behaving as a Buddhist,
yes,
right?
yes, yes. So, you know, she had made the thing in there that she doesn't believe Buddhism is a religion. She believes it's a philosophy. And people will ask me, do I think Buddhism? They'll ask me, is Buddhism a religion or a philosophy? And most of the time they're Christian. And so I've come back and said, well, is Christianity a religion or a philosophy? And it's true, many people approach it as simply a religion, and yet there is a philosophy there.
Mhm.
There is a way of life. There is a belief system for behavior, in
Mhm.
addition to a belief system for faith. So
Mhm.
there's a religious aspect and a philosophical aspect to Christianity. That's my belief,
Mhm.
and the same applies for Buddhism. It certainly is a philosophical or I guess you could say a guidance for how to live or how to be or how to view the world, and it also incorporates devotion. That devotion has been an integral part of Buddhism. Devotion is how we nurture
Mhm.
this philosophy in our lives when we're not at at our sacred space. Devotion is much the same as lighting the candle in the sanctuary to the Virgin Mary,
Mhm.
or uh, in Mexico when they do the milagros and the little roadside shrines. They put these little charms in there.
Mhm.
This is devotion, and this is a religious aspect. And why do we do that? We do that to strengthen, to touch base with the, I guess you could say, the visceral part of the philosophy. Philosophy is a great intellectual activity and doesn't do anything if it's just merely philosophical. I mean, philosophers sit around and debate all day long and accomplish nothing. Um, it's religious people who get things done, either good or bad. Religion can be a terrible, terrible thing, or it can be a very beneficial, helpful thing. So I believe that Buddhism is a religion that has a philosophy, just as I believe Christianity is a religion that has a philosophy.
Mhm.
Uh, Now, it's true that some people practice it, Buddhism as only a philosophy and Christianity as only a religion. But I think I mean, my personal feeling is that it kind of misses the point anyway. So yeah. And then finally, the attainment of Buddhahood by all people. These are some of the characteristics that point to the superiority of the Lotus Sutra over all the other Buddhist teachings. Another thing is that part of it in there, and I'll say this, is that the enlightenment of women occurs in no place else but the Lotus Sutra, as far as any of the other Buddhist teachings. So again, we have these universal attainment of Buddhahood by all people. All right, that's the end of That's the end of slide 12. Um, Slide 13 moves into China, and I just don't feel that I have enough time tonight to really get into that. So I'll put that off. But what I would like to do now is I'm going to try to. Oops, that's not what I want to do. I'm going to try to put my screen. Okay, I've put my camera on. I've hid the webcam, but I'm still. Let's see where I want to show the webcam. Pardon me. I'm sometimes need to take a moment to talk my way through talk my way through uh, this software. Okay, pardon me. Webcams. Show all webcams. Oops. All right, it's under PowerPoint. Okay, there you are. Yes. Hey. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm well. Yes. Any questions or comments or observations? This is
Um,
being recorded, by the way.
okay, that's fine. I enjoyed Ryusha. I enjoyed your lecture. I did have a concern as I was watching your screen. It wasn't the screens of the PowerPoint weren't renewing themselves, so it was always on the first screen. I'm not sure if that's
Oh,
how,
really?
yeah, you were seeing it from yours. It may just be my Apple or perhaps. But I understood what you're saying, and I do have some questions that I was
Yeah, that's
thinking.
interesting. I'll have to look at. I've been trying to convert the part one into a video for YouTube, and I was kind of wondering about that because when I convert it, I only see one slide the whole time, just one slide, and perhaps you're revealing something, and nobody commented on it last time, so I don't know, but I'll have to look into that. But thank you for making an observation and taking the time to actually share it. So I will have to.
Well, I wish I made it earlier. Perhaps I would have been more helpful. But interestingly, now I see number 12, I guess, is Buddhism in India in the Age of the True Dharma. Uh, at any rate, I really enjoyed it, and I was just one thing that was really striking to me was when you were talking about the identity of subject and object, and how important it is that as Namu, as the person who is the trying to embody the respect for the Lotus Sutra, I actually behave as if I'm reading and living the Lotus Sutra, so that I'm actually embodying it for other people. I'm the book
Right.
from
Yeah,
perhaps someone
that's
else.
it. You're the book. Good.
Yeah, I really kind of like that point, but I wanted to ask you a couple of questions that I really never understood. And
Okay.
when you were speaking at the beginning about you were saying about we're in the period of Mappo, the period of confusion, as you were calling it. And you said that in the second 500-year period, which was the period of meditation, your
Hmm.
PowerPoint said solid meditation and study. Um, is that does that mean that because we're in the period of Mappo, that we're no longer in a period where meditation is useful?
I wouldn't say that. No. I would say that in that first 500-year period, the second 500 year, it was an exclusive practice.
I see.
So meditation was the practice.
Uh,
Uh, and now in this period, uh, meditation among other things. That's why in the Lotus Sutra talks about the five practices.
uh,
Read, recite, copy, teach, and so read, recite, copy, teach, and all of a sudden I'm drawing a blank. But anyway, five practices. I'll have to look that up and send you an email or something. But five practices. Why am I forgetting it? Um, teach, read, recite, copy. Oh, expound is teach. Hold on a second. Maybe I can find it real quick.
study was.
Anyway, so the five practices are what we are supposed to engage in today. Now, what is meditation? Um, I'm not sure if you've ever experienced it. I will assume that you have, that you've been engaged in some hobby or activity, maybe even teaching, when you are just so, a cheap word that has been used nowadays is flow.
Uh,
I don't like that. I don't like that trite expression, but you're just kind of in the groove. Nothing else. You're just so focused on
mhm,
what you're doing in that particular moment that the world both doesn't exist and completely exists in that moment. I know when I used to run a printing press, there were just frequently times when, I'm listening to the machinery, I'm hearing the ink hiss on the rollers, and I'm watching the water as it cascades off the water roller, and I'm hearing the sheets of paper pull off of the impression blanket, and just hearing the pounding of the force when the impression blanket hits the impression cylinder and the paper's in between, just all of these things. And I'm unwrapping the reams of paper, preparing them for the next batch that goes on the press, and I'm taking the current batch off the back end of the press, and just have a everything would be just so harmonious.
Mhm.
Almost like I'm the machine is me. All of these activities are just in such harmony that, in a way, nothing else exists, and yet everything exists in those moments. Uh, and that's actually technically, by the definition, meditation.
Mhm.
Chanting is definitely considered meditation. Chanting has been a part of Buddhist practice throughout the ages. So even when we're talking about meditation in this second 500-year period, we're not just talking about silent contemplation.
Mhm.
Meditation has always included the oral expression of the sutras. How else do we teach it? How else do we spread it? We're still talking pre-written history here,
Uh-huh.
pre-written Indian script, and it is very much still an oral tradition.
Then, so one of the things I guess what you were just saying is that because we were further away from the initial period of Buddha's life and his the subsequent development of his teachings, we just need more equipment to get back to incorporate that into our lives, not just the meditation and whatever it was that was sufficient in that first age, but as you say, the five practices that the Lotus Sutra
Yeah,
suggests.
equipment. I kind of stay away from equipment because,
Uh-huh.
but there are actually more things for us to engage in to
Uh-huh.
connect with ourselves. You know, we're I hate to sound like the Lotus Sutra is prophetic, but there's a certain amount of reality that we can, or certain observations. So you know, organization theory. I studied that for a little while, and what the Buddha said during his lifetime, or what is presented in the Lotus Sutra, is really a good example of the degradation of an organization over time.
Hmm.
The United States government does not look like, I can almost guarantee it, even though I can't go back in time, it does not look like it did shortly after the Continental Congress. Go with the final Constitution. It doesn't look like that. It doesn't. It won't look like what we have now in another 200 years. It'll be different. Everything changes. Organizational structure degrades over time or evolves. So in a way, what the Buddha is teaching is nothing more than a 2,000-year early understanding of organizational structure, organizational systems theories. Yeah, I gave a presentation a couple of months ago at Temple Bethel on science and religion. Can they coexist? And I said, in many ways, while other religions are trying to stand up against science and in a way prove their validity or disprove science. Buddhism is a kind of a unique position of waiting for science to catch up with many of the Buddhist teachings. So, you know, we have in our current age a very short attention span.
Hmm.
We have the ability to be overstimulated without even realizing it. We have the ability to, um, you know, multitask in ways that weren't even possible. When I used to run printing press, this was the beginning of the Walkman technology. With the little tape recorder cassettes that you could stick in a little player
Yes.
and have earphones.
Yeah.
Prior to that, portable audio stimulation was didn't exist.
Uh,
It was an outside speaker system that blasted music, and if you're running a printing press, which is pretty loud, that just doesn't happen. So the Walkman was it was a fantastic electronic opportunity for a press operator to stand there and listen to music and not have his ears blasted out by equipment and machinery. And now look what we have.
yes.
So in a way, the Lotus Sutra is offering us many ways to
Hmm.
stimulate ourselves with
Hmm.
with the Lotus Sutra. Um,
Hmm.
you know, And yet they're all common sense. Why copy the sutra? Well, copy the sutra not just to collect it, but to share it,
Mm.
to teach it, to so it's all about spreading Buddhism.
When you were talking about the, and I've read elsewhere as well that the Lotus Sutra, while it's not the literal words of the Buddha, it Buddhism is implicit throughout, and it can be extrapolated from things that the Buddha's said in earlier sutras. So is that well, that's not really formed like a question. I guess my question is, people will ask, like, if it's not the words of the Buddha, how can it be Buddhist? And I guess I'm trying to understand that your answer is everything the Buddha said is not, it's not contradicted by the sutra. It's supported and elaborated upon. Is that a fair understanding?
Yeah, yes. So there's the theory of the three seals or four seals, depending upon which version of this theory that you subscribe to. But basically, the three seals is that uh, first off, no sutra found or discovered can be considered authentic if it contradicts anything in particular, that the Buddha would have said. So if it goes against any of the fundamental teachings of the Buddha, then it would be considered false. If it does not teach karma, then it would be false. And there's one other seal, and these have been, in a sense, I guess you could say, the three proofs to determine whether any sutra found or discovered or taught could be considered authentic or genuine from the Buddha's heart or spirit.
I see.
The Lotus Sutra, there is, probably a portion or a small part of the Lotus Sutra was actually taught by the Buddha or in the Buddha's life, within that lifetime or shortly after. I think it's chapter 10, is by some people considered the beginning of the Lotus Sutra, that everything sort of expands out from chapter 10. We actually see a significant transition moment in chapter 10. And in my lecture book on the Lotus Sutra, I talk about transition moments in the Lotus Sutra. And I think the transition moments can be very revelatory. In chapter 10, we have the transition by the Buddha saying that we don't venerate the body or the person of the Buddha. What should be venerated is the teaching of the Buddha. So we have this transition from statue worship, I guess you could say, to doctrine worship in a way. And also in the Lotus, and this theme also occurs several other places within the Lotus Sutra that are definitely newer than chapter 10. So chapter 10 is considered kind of by many people the beginning essence of the Lotus Sutra, which was expanded upon. There are chapters in there. The Devadatta chapter, in a way, if you read it, it doesn't belong there. In other versions of translations of the Lotus Sutra, it's in other places, or it's a part of another chapter. The chapters beyond chapter 21 or 22 are definitely much later additions to the Lotus Sutra. They also, when you read it, doesn't sound like it belongs there. It's just too much stuff that all of a sudden happens in the latter chapters, 20, 22, 23, 24, that how did they get there? There's a huge logical leap. And then, things that are left undone when you get to chapter 21 or 22 never get done. So it's sort of like, there's this disconnect.
I see.
And so yet we know that, and then why do we continue to study it? Well, we continue to study it because that's what Nichiren believed. That's what he understood the Lotus Sutra. He didn't have all of the archaeological discoveries that we've made. He didn't have the technology to compare things. He had one translation, and that's what he believed. And so we're trying to understand what Nichiren is trying to teach us from the Lotus Sutra. And really, there's nothing that appears in these later, more modern chapters that contradicts, goes against anything that has previously been said. We just have a larger worldview than Nichiren had. And
I see.
that's kind of the point I was making about this image of the two Buddhas sitting side by side that had been sealed up in these caves from the 8th, 9th century on into, and then finally Nichiren reveals this same image. There's no
Mm-hmm.
way he could have seen it.
Mm-hmm.
There's never been another image or representation of that idea of two Buddhas sitting side by side found or discovered since they were in Kazil or Dunhuan. Tentai Chihi never created such an image.
Mm-hmm.
So, so where did Nichiren get it from? Well, a truth, a fundamental truth. Again, going back to this idea that a fundamental truth will continue to reemerge if it is truly a fundamental truth, and it's a fundamental truth of the Lotus Sutra. So,
I don't want to keep you. I had some more questions I wrote down as,
I've slotted till 9:30. So as long as you can stay, I'm good.
okay, then this is probably a really minor question, and it just came to me while I was thinking about Mappo and the different nature of Buddhism in the various periods. But um, this idea of samadhi, I guess the experience of being, of course I can't describe it because I've never experienced it, but it seems so important in some varieties of Buddhism. Is that something that's not it's not important to Nichirenists?
Well, I don't think there's anything unimportant. Uh, I just think that we emphasize
Uh-huh.
certain things more than others. Part of Nichiren's approach was making this something that anybody, any place, any time, any ability could do.
Mm,
Um, you know, is the only way to attain enlightenment chanting Namu Myoho Renge Kyo? I don't believe so. I mean, in my heart of hearts, I don't believe so. Perhaps the corporate policy would require me to toe the company line, but that would be exactly what it would be. It would be just following corporate policy. Um,
Tomorrow you get a phone call from human resources.
yeah, yeah, and kind of in some ways that's how religion functions, and I don't have any problem putting it into those terms because that's the way religions function sometimes, and we might as well just be honest about it. So, but in my heart of hearts, I don't believe that Namu Myoho Renge Kyo is the only way to attain enlightenment. I believe more that Namu Myoho Renge Kyo is a way universally that all people can attain enlightenment. So it's possible for someone to go out and do something and attain enlightenment, but that something may not be something that everybody can do.
Mhm.
Namu Myoho Renge Kyo is something that, in one way or another, everyone can do. And by doing that, it would enable anyone, regardless of any limitation, capacity, so on and so forth, to attain enlightenment. So it's a universal teaching, but it's not how shall we say, an absolute and only teaching. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
I do. I understand. Yes.
So
Uh,
these other practices are certainly they're good, but our business, our company business is Namu Myoho Renge Kyo.
okay.
Yeah.
You gotta have you stick to the school I teach. We have you have these schools that have these vision statements and these
Yes. Yes.
uh,
Yeah.
statements of purpose, and they can become so amorphous that the school they pretty much justify any sort of good project that the school can conceive of,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
the school's basic function becomes more and more tenuous.
They become a
Uh,
religion in and of themselves in a way.
yeah, sure. People will look at them and think we'll more or less try and fit anything into them.
Yeah.
To um,
Justify or whatever. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about you mentioned that the early Mahayanists seem to have been anti-monastic. Does that continue, or are Mahayanists? I know that I have very little understanding of Theravadan Buddhism, but in America, for example, there aren't a whole lot of monasteries.
There
So
actually are.
are there really,
Yeah, yeah.
compared to other more traditionally Buddhist countries? Is
Oh,
what
well,
I'm
not.
saying.
But I mean, we're a smaller population. We actually have quite a large number considering the size of our population in a
Sure.
way.
Okay.
Uh, you know, okay, so Great Vow Monastery. It's a Zen monastery in Clastonite, Oregon.
Uh-huh.
Uh, it's an old school, an old elementary school that was bought by the Zen Sangha. Oh, probably I don't know, maybe 20 or so years ago.
Uh-huh.
I just saw some. I visited there and was there in 2006 and 2007, and I have memories of what I saw at that particular time. And I just saw some recent photos from someone who came back from a retreat there from at the monastery. Oh, it's amazing what they've done. I mean, this old school now kind of looks like something you'd find in Japan. Uh, which is kind of weird because can't a Buddhist monastery look American? Anyway,
That's a fair,
you know,
that's,
but we have this thing about I don't think Americans are quite yet to the point of really making Buddhism an American experience. The Zen people have certainly tried by eliminating sutra reciting, by eliminating anything that sounded Japanese, but were accepting of anything that looked Japanese, which is kind of a a weird thing.
they're going for the
But
optics.
huh?
They're going for the optics. They
Yeah,
still feel
yeah,
like they have to
a visual
change themselves.
experience,
Yeah.
uh, and which is also kind of a contradiction because Zen is kind of a plain experience normally. But then if you go to Japan or Vietnam, if you go to Plum Village in France, which are all Zen, Plum Village is a Zen monastery. Zen monasteries in France, you will see lots and lots of ritual. You will see lots and lots of sutra chanting, and in fact, some of the West Coast Zen monasteries are bringing back sutra chanting,
Uh,
realizing that ritual is an important part of our Buddhist practice. It's not just sitting in silent meditation. Many people have complaints, many Zen people I've heard complain about Zen Buddhism is that people just come there it's like a self help group, but
yeah.
only for yourself. You're there just meditating and you're not relating, you're not experiencing, you're not in Sangha. You're just there for your own self improvement. But that is changing. So Zen Great Vow Monastery. There is Dharma Rain, which is a quasi monastery. They have some monastery experience. They certainly have some people who live in a monasterial situation for a year or two. Uh, that's also in Portland. That's in Portland, Oregon. It's actually around the corner from the Nichiren Shu Temple. Dharma Rain owns some other buildings, some dormitory type buildings where they have communal living situations. That's just two in Oregon. There's uh,
I know
in
there's the Mountain Rivers Monastery in New York State, and
yeah, yeah.
they have, I guess, affiliates in the city.
There's several in Colorado. It's New Mexico. Uh, there's let's see. So there are actually quite a few of them. We have a quasi monastery here in North Carolina, up in Asheville. All of a sudden, we're getting some feedback.
Are there, is there, I know that Nichiren Shu is actually trying to do a lot to um, Americanize without losing its connection to Japan. I mean, it's a specifically Japanese uh, version of Buddhism, but is there um, some sense where you feel like your the American version of Nichiren Shu is itself a going concern. It's more or less independent of any sort of energy being received from Japan.
I think it's a little too early to tell,
Uh-huh.
and I don't know why we're getting feedback all of a sudden. But I'm.
Okay.
It, I don't think it's you. It just all of a sudden happened. The recording is going to sound terrible, and I apologize for that. Let me see what I can do. Let me turn my, well, if I turn my volume down, I won't be able to hear you. Are you hearing a feedback?
I don't hear. I occasionally hear a little bit of garble, but I understand you, and I'm not getting any of the feedback that I think you're hearing.
Okay, well, I guess I'll have to go on. It's very annoying to me because I can hear myself repeat myself. I have to kind of ignore that. Anyway, to answer your question, to answer your question, I think that the verdict is still out. There is a group of American, they're not American born, but they're American now, but they're Japanese origin. Not all of them, but there's a group of them who are not prepared to let this become a fully Americanized, with a unique American identity organization.
I see.
That's understandable. Change is hard.
Yes.
Who moved my cheese? The book several years ago.
Yeah, I remember that book.
In a way, they haven't found their little running shoe.
Uh-huh.
And from the side that wants to change, we're not even clear on where would we be going. What would change look like? It's difficult to understand, partly because I don't think we've embraced Buddhism with our lives in a way that's independent from either culture or intellect.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to practice the Lotus Sutra? In my little prayer book, I included a prayer by St. Francis.
Yes, yeah.
It is not a particularly Christian prayer, although it certainly has its origin in Christianity. It doesn't talk a lot about God. It doesn't talk a lot about, things like Jesus and stuff like that. It's a pretty universal prayer. It is a Western prayer. It is prayed in a way that you don't find in the translations of the Japanese prayers. And yet, to me, it speaks more closely to my heart than some of the things that I read that are part of our corporate, stuff. And so I don't know that that's the answer, but I think that's where we have to get to. And in a way, my generation of priests, but we're not talking about age generation, we're not talking about our appearance or our time in this process. I think our role is not so much in defining what an American version of Nichiren should look like, but of opening the door to the future, defining what it would be. Mm-hmm. So there's always people that cannot change. There's another group of people that are going to have to force the transition. Mm-hmm. And then there's another group of people that's going to really kind of smooth out the rough edges. Because part of the group that wants to move into transition has to be in opposition to a group that does not want to transition. So the group that is in favor of transition has to be forward-looking and also reactive to backward.
Yes.
That's not really a very open position. You have to defend while you have to be on the offensive while you're on the defensive.
Yeah.
And what I think that transition provides is an opportunity for another generation to come along and say, we don't have to defend it. Let's create.
Uh-huh. So, as you see it, your generation of priests, you and Myote Kame Barrett and the fellows out in Portland and Oregon and in California, sort of
New York and Boston.
You're making it possible for the people who come after you to start to think about how they want to go forward and how they want to develop in, separate in distinction to the original Nichiren Shu, and with an eye to the future as well.
I think so. I think that you know, part of what my generation of is doing is reacting to negative feedback, negative or oppositional kinds of position.
Mm.
And that's not really. I don't really see that as really forward looking. It's not far enough. Again, I think it's very reactionary. Reactionary isn't liberating. As long as you're tied to reacting to something, then you're not free or you're not liberated to experience and to express yourself freely. You're tied to responding.
You're always in the terms of the person to whom you're responding. You're not really stating things in your own terms. You're always trying to refute their understanding of you.
Yeah, or defend your position. When the position is so accepted, and of course there will be transition even in that. But when we no longer have to say that things have to be done in Japanese, when we get beyond that, and we say we don't have to sit on the floor. Temple furniture doesn't need to look a certain way.
Yeah.
That looks Japanese. What is the core or essential part of the way we represent people? Do we even need to wear these? You know where these garments come from? That we wear? They're from 9th century Chinese court garments. You go back in history and look at Chinese garments in the 9th century that were worn by court nobles. They're identical to the clothes we're wearing now. Do we need to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, we certainly need some sort of garments. Whether it be a more Western interpretation, or whether we decide to keep this East Asian look. But this conversation, we ought to be able to be engaged in without reacting to a negative comment. It should be something that, let's consider this for a moment. And this is just one example. Why not have chairs? Now, many temples now have chairs, so that makes sense. But, when I was a chair was not an option. Well, why?
Yeah.
I got away with sitting in what I called and what they call a side saddle, as opposed to the Japanese seiza. And the way they allowed me to do that was because they said that that's how the Buddha sat. But they had to justify.
Yeah, they had to have some traditional justification.
To allow me to sit the way I did, when in fact neither of the two ways is crucial or fundamental to Buddhism. The seiza position that the Japanese priests sit in is from the samurai. Okay, that's not Buddhism.
Wow.
So we need to have these conversations.
Well, I really appreciate your taking the time, and like I said, I enjoyed your presentation a great deal, and you've answered a lot of questions here.
Well, hopefully I've created more questions.
Well, you've caused me to go back to the Lotus Sutra. I'd like to read it again now with all this stuff in mind. Sometimes I get a little bit bewildered by the trappings, and I don't hear the 5 ways of honoring the Lotus Sutra. That's an important thing that I easily miss when I'm reading. There's that one part where they bare their shoulders and they walk, I guess, 3 times. That sort of thing will just that's a forest that I have to sort of get through to understand.
And I love those kind of things. That's why I have a whole chapter in my lecture book just on transition moments, things that people just ignore. You know,
Yes.
the Magic City stuff was all about stuff that's not there because I love
Uh-huh.
that stuff. So anyway, thank you very much for joining tonight.
Oh, I enjoyed it, and thanks for doing it.
Of course, and we'll see how the recording comes out, for better or for worse. There'll be a link to the recording in the Dropbox file. Uh, or actually, on the calendar, there'll be a link to the Dropbox recording. I don't know what it'll look like, but and eventually I'll try to get it on YouTube.
Okay.
Please tell everybody I said hello.
Will
Yes,
do.
so we can't. Oh, they over 3 times.
Sure.
Namu myo renge kyo. Namu myo renge kyo. Namu myo renge kyo. I will tell you one thing that's annoying, and that's the reflection on my glasses, but I don't know how to eliminate that. So anyway, tell Belle I said hello as well.
I will.
Yeah.
Thank you, Risha.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.